Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the Kid Lit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of Kid Lit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kid Lit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your host, here to welcome you to another weekly conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I'm talking books with Natalia Sylvester. Natalia is an award-winning author of both adult books and young adult books. Her adult book titles are books like Everyone Knows You Go Home and Chasing the Sun. And her YA books are Breathe and Count Back from 10, my personal favorite, and Running. And while I'm hoping to sneak in a quick conversation about Breathe and Count Back from 10 because I loved it so much, we are here today to talk about Natalia's brand new picture book releasing in April, A Maleta Full of Treasures. Natalia, welcome to the Kid Lit Love podcast. I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. I'm excited to be here too.
I am too. And as I mentioned before we hit record, I'm not sure why I didn't make the connection, but I loved your YA book, Breathe and Count Back from 10, for so many reasons,
Thank you.
which maybe we'll be able to get into. And so I was so excited to know that you have a picture book coming out. But then on top of that, to know that I didn't even know about your adult selections either. So I ran to the library, to the internet and put them on the holds list. And so I'm so excited to surround myself in more of your books and be part of your launch team, so to speak, and getting your picture book out into the world.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's begin with introductions. You do write for a wide range of audience, adult, young adult, and now picture book. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your writing and maybe what led to the picture book here today?
Sure. Yeah, and actually I love that you brought up the YA because in some ways it's a little bit linked to the picture book. So, but yeah, I am a writer of many books. My first were for adults. My debut came out in 2014. It was called Chasing the Sun, and my sophomore novel for adults came out in 2018 called Everyone Knows You Go Home. And along the way, I remember I've always read very widely. So I read for all ages, all different genres. And so I just feel like a story comes to you when it comes to you in the form that it's meant to be. So when I first started writing my first YA, which is Running, I remember sending it to my agent and she was like, "You're writing YA now?" And I was like, "Oh, I guess I am." And it makes sense because I love so much. I love reading YA. And then similarly, when I was writing Breathe and Count Back from 10, there were some days when the writing was really hard. And it dealt with some themes very close to my own experience, having to do with my own disability. And there were just days when, even though the book has a lot of joy, I remember there was this one day in particular where I was really struggling because there was a very hard scene to write. And so I took a couple, I needed a few days of just stepping away from the book. And I remember thinking to myself, I want to just write a story that's joyful. I want to reconnect to these joyful parts of writing. And so, and it's funny because again, the Maleta Full of Treasures is actually in a way connected to both of my YAs, because in Running, which is my first YA, there's a scene in which a Peruvian American teenager offers a Peruvian candy that she brought from her home country. She offers it to my main character. And she tells her, "Well, I have a maleta full back home," which really means I have a suitcase full of them back home. And when the book was going through the editing process, one of the editors asked me like, "Hey, how come you don't just say suitcase?" Like, and not to like they weren't suggesting it, but they were just asking for the intention behind that particular code switching. And I remember telling them, well, the thing about the word maleta is that it's a very emotional packed word for me. You know, having grown up, I was born in Peru. I came to the US when I was 4. I lived in South Florida and also the Valley in Texas for several parts of my childhood. I've always had a very bilingual community. And so um, even when I'm speaking in English to people who are perfectly like bilingual and fluent and we speak in English to each other, if I happen to say like, oh yeah, I'm going on a field trip and I just bought a new maleta, like I will always say maleta instead of suitcase. And I was recently on a trip with some friends and we were all like helping her carry her suitcase around and we're all like Latin and it was making me laugh so hard because the amount of times we said maleta instead of suitcase. And it's because, at least for me, the connection to this particular word really goes back to childhood. And it goes back to when I was young and I couldn't go back to Peru for many years because we were, getting all our immigration papers sorted out. And I didn't remember anything about Peru. I didn't remember my birthplace, but the ways that I maintained a connection to it was through relatives and friends who would visit, and they would bring with them all sorts of gifts in their maletas. And so every time I saw these like suitcases, I would just wonder what's in them, and they were never anything like things that were particularly like expensive. The value was in their like what they you know, like that connection that they brought me. Like it might be letters from relatives, it might be candies that I could only find in Peru, it might be history books. My mom insisted we learn Peruvian history. So all these different treasures. And so that's really where the idea for creating a story around that emotional attachment to this word came. And so in the book, Dulce's grandmother visits and brings this maleta full of all these treasures to connect her to her loved ones and her, this other home that she's really never been to but really longs for. Um, and so long story short, though, that I ended up writing it in that period when I was trying to take a break from the heavier parts of writing Breathe and Count Back from 10. Um, and that this is the story that came out of like me just trying to connect to a story that was just very much about joyfulness and celebration.
Yeah. That makes my love of this book, of both books, even stronger because to now know that your new picture book, came from an opportunity, or a need of a break, which turned out into this beautiful book in the end from another book that I had loved was just finding an Easter egg, inside the book. And now knowing that when I read running, I'm going to find that little mention in there too. So I
Yeah.
love how your books are they're related to you, they're related to what what you're going through or your own experiences and how they seem to thread together like that, which is nice to understand now, especially as I go into reading the next ones. And as a reader, I think you said you said something about emotion or the book being emotional. This was one of those books, even though it is a picture book, that when I closed the last page, I just kind of sat. I just
Mm.
sat at the table because I was overcome with my own emotions, my own memories, my own ideas of my grandparents. Now, certainly different situations. I am lucky enough that my extended family has lived very close to me for my whole entire life, but I really could connect to this idea that certain people, certain family bonds, certain connections, I could think of the foods, the things, the candies that so tied me to them, right?
Yeah.
So, like when I think of one set of grandparents, my grandfather just loved molasses cookies to drink with his coffee every morning. And so I
Oh.
thought, let me think for a minute. And I just went family member by family member after reading your book. Actually went to my notebook and I wrote about it, but of those things that made me think about those emotional connections, whether it was the cookies. My grandmother loved these little white meltable mints.
Mm.
It was just such a beautiful invitation, I think, for readers to not just experience the story that you've provided, but then help them think about their own and the same kind of connections they might have. So that was it was a beautiful experience to read the book.
Oh, I love that. That makes me so happy because I hoped it would be. I really do. I hope that um I always hope that like people would find different ways to relate to it because I think that's what connects us as people. Like we don't our experiences don't have to be exactly the same for us to find something in common.
Right.
Um and yeah, even as you were saying that, like I was thinking of my own grandmothers and um like my grandmother on my dad's side, every time she came to the US, she always loved to eat these Keebler, I think it was Keebler, like the butter pecan cookies. And it was just
Oh,
like
my grandmother did too.
right in that yellow packaging. And oh my
Yes.
God. And I never ate them unless she was in town because we wouldn't buy them otherwise. And so I forever associate them with her.
Yes. That is so funny. My grandmother, another grandmother always had this big glass cookie jar on the counter that was always filled whenever I would come by, and pecan sandies, which is I'm
Yes,
pretty
that's
sure
the
the cookie
one.
you're talking
You're
about. But
totally right. That's Thank you for mentioning that.
yep, those were the cookies that were there, along with the Vienna fingers, these yummy kind of vanilla sandwich
Mm,
cookies. And
yeah.
it's amazing how thinking about those foods or those treats or those candies can just instantly
Hmm.
transport you to that connection
Yeah.
and that emotion.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. When I was looking through the book, first the illustrations are beautiful. They
Oh,
are beautiful.
yes. I
Um,
love them so much. Juana Medina is incredible. Just absolutely amazing.
yeah, they're so inviting. It's got, it alternates. It's mainly a white backdrop with these
Mhm.
beautiful pictures, but then sometimes that backdrop changes, which makes you feel like you're just kind of in the story with the characters. What I really loved though is you could really see the emotion on
Yeah.
the characters' faces, which brought the story to life. And I especially loved this one spread where, she understands the importance of what is in that maleta and then decides, to gather her own things that
Mm.
might bring someone as much joy as well. And I'm just curious from your perspective, how, especially knowing now that the story started while you were on a break from another story, of how that developed. The idea was sparked with that suitcase, but then the idea of kind of returning the favor and just looping this connection. I'm just curious of how you went from that first idea and then kind of fleshed it out into such a beautiful full circle kind of book
Mm.
like that.
I love that that's such a great question because I'm thinking about the evolution of the story. And that wasn't in the initial draft. It was that one moment you mentioned. And it was thanks to my editor, Nancy Mercado, who's just incredible. And she herself like related to the story so much and her own experiences with relatives coming to visit. And I think I remember at one point she was like, I feel like we're lacking just one more like beat, and like any wonderful editor, like she wasn't like you have to do this or that, like it was just like, hey, have you thought maybe there's something else, um and she like and I just thought, okay, yeah, let me see what I can do, and she was right, of course, and I thought, yeah, this isn't really only about what abuela is bringing to Dulce. It's really also about what she'll take back with her, like this exchange, this communication across an ocean or cultures or borders, like when um when the abuela, there's a scene or a spread where she reads letters to her from her cousins, and Dulce mentions like they send me love, and even though we've never met. And I just thought, well, wouldn't she want to send that love back? And so what would be the ways for her to do that? And so yeah, I'm really grateful to Nancy for the ways like she helped me see that like this would really make her story complete, or this particular story complete.
Yeah. And then on the last page, well, I hate to give spoilers. I do love that the last page is a letter, a note, which was just such a beautiful way to end. And she's got it close to her, close to her heart. It really is
Mhm.
such a beautiful, it's such a beautiful story. Like I said, I needed a few
Mhm.
moments after I finished that last page, and I can imagine kids listening to this, whether they're reading it with their families or reading it in classrooms or libraries, that would have the opportunity to feel that spark or that sense of
Mhm.
connection as well.
Oh, thank you.
My goodness, you're so welcome. And I'm lucky because I have the book in front of me and I just love sifting through it. It is such a celebration of family, of connection, of love, and how they endure, right? Over
Yeah.
time, over space, and location. And like I said, those can't see it yet, but there's just something about the facial expressions that bring it all to life to me too.
I know. And the amazing thing is that like the illustration itself, like Juana's illustration and the facial expressions, like they're very they're so minimalist, right? And
Yes.
yet so much comes through in like, like the dots of the eyes, the little curve. I remember, along this was such an amazing process for me because it's my first time. Um, all my other books, because they didn't involve an illustrator other than the cover, the storytelling aspect of it, was really based on the text. And this one, it's like the book was not complete until we had the illustrations, adding that dimension and bringing it to life. And so I remember like the process felt so much like this exchange of energy. And like when my editor would send me this, like from the initial sketches that she sent that Juana had drawn to like the final ones, every moment just felt so, in a strange way, it felt very healing to me, like to my inner child, because I just thought, like, I can't believe that there is going to be this book with a child that looks so much like my own childhood. And I'd never seen that growing up. I was that kid who was always at the library checking out as many books as I possibly could. And I found all these different ways to relate um, to the books that I read, but never quite as directly as the aspects that Juana brought out. Like when I saw like just even the details she puts in the homes and the patterns of the textiles. um, it's just so thoughtful and so connected to like Andean culture. And she's Colombian, she's Colombian, and also came to the US. I believe I came when I was 4. I believe she came over either in her late teens or early adulthood. I forget exactly, but a little later than I did. And so like we both have that experience of like this biculturalism, and as being neighboring countries, there's a lot that we share in common, but I also feel like she pulled so much from these specific aspects of Peruvian culture that really, to me, just felt like, wow, someone took this lens of my own childhood and put it in a book.
Mm.
And to even think, well, to think of a child now seeing that and recognizing themselves in it was really beautiful.
That must be something, because one thing I have learned from the wonderful conversations with authors I've had on the podcast is so many authors say that they found themselves writing the book that they wish they had
Yeah.
when they were a child. You find the same thing?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think I realized it at the time. But absolutely. And it's this mixture of you're writing to your younger self and then you're writing to today's children, right? But there's no like your younger self still lives in you. So it's yeah. So it's actually really beautiful. And I feel that way was just in so many ways with everything I've written for children or and for young adults.
Yeah. there, I'm thinking there are so many books, that I read now as an adult that is children's literature. First of all, I am a children's literature professor, so I read books for work, but I tell everybody, and I think you captured it so beautifully, right? Adults, when we read children's literature, we really are reading to our inner child. And
Yeah.
that little girl, that little boy, that they are still in there and they can feel
Mm,
so soothed and seen from these books, where a picture book that many adults might not think is for them is actually just what many of us need to feel good and to feel that
mm,
connection. So I love that you've said that. I think that's why I really loved Breathe and Count Back from 10 so much. While the situations were different, as a kid, I dealt with a lot with a chronic illness, and there weren't books about other kids who were dealing with that kinds of thing too. There were books to help me figure out what life could be like when I could get out of the room, but
mm,
not necessarily what was going on during it. So I
yeah.
think that's why I connected on an adult level so much to that book. And I'd love for you to sneak in a little conversation about
Sure.
this one. Do you mind telling listeners a little bit of that YA book? And then, they can go grab a picture book and a YA book and round out their reading.
I love it. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So Breathe and Count Back from 10 is about a Peruvian American teen named Veronica. She's 17. She, like me, was born with hip dysplasia and has gone through many surgeries throughout her childhood. And she lives in a town where there's a performing mermaid theme park, where, performers put on tails and dance underwater. And the summer before her senior year, she finds out that they're having auditions. So she is wanting to audition to become a professional mermaid, um, all at the same time that she's also falling in love for the first time and dealing with her overprotective immigrant parents who have very different ideas of how she should live her dreams and her life in general. Even though they do it out of protecting her, she feels very stifled by it. So she has a lot of decisions to make that summer.
That was such a beautiful setup. There are so many things in that book that I love. And I think, the piece that I didn't realize I became fascinated with was mermaids.
Yeah.
And just thinking about it and imagining it and getting on Google and just really letting myself have some fun with that aspect while connecting to that more serious side and the analogy of her desperately wanting to, a couple levels, wanting to do something that her family wasn't so sure of, wanting to lean into that passion, but just feeling differently about her own body, right? In relation to mermaids. I could just appreciate it on so many levels. And I felt it was a book that I needed, but it also sparked just a whole lot of fun in thinking
Oh,
about what that looked like for me. So
thank
it's
you.
a
Oh,
beautiful book. I
thank you.
loved it. I'm so glad that I was able to make the connection. So listeners
Yeah.
may
And
have pressed. Oh no, go
sorry.
ahead.
Oh no, I'm just saying I love that you love the mermaid aspect because I did too, and I think it was such an important part of the story for me. And I actually couldn't write the story until I figured out the mermaid aspect, because I feel like yes, I dealt, I was born disabled, and there were times when it's not without its challenging challenges, but there's like my life was also full of beautiful richness and desires and obsessions like mermaids, right? And so I always want to bring in those like layers, right? I don't ever want a story to be only about one thing, seen only through one lens, because we're so whole and we're so much multifaceted. Um, and so for me, like the mermaids were part of really being like, how am I going to be more true to this character? And in a way true to who we are and all the different things that we love and desire and long for.
Oh, well, it was beautiful. And I'm really excited that someone could have pressed play today to hear about the beautiful picture book and now also get a YA title
Yeah.
they can add to their TBR stack too. So are there any new projects, anything that you're working on that you can talk about and thinking of what you hope for your writing in the future?
Yeah, gosh, they're so okay. So let's see. Um, I do, I have another picture book coming, um, and I believe it'll be a few years till it's out, but it's it's called The Warmest Light, and it was actually, speaking of writing for our younger selves, um, it's a book that's written for a child who may be either dealing with disability or chronic illness and maybe being in and out of hospitals like I was growing up or enduring a lot of medical procedures. And really, I think of this story as much of like as an embrace and like a warm hug for them and wanting and a reminder of all the ways that we are still inherently whole, even though our bodies um, might at times be going through things that we don't see other children having to go through. And I'm just really excited about it. And it's going to be illustrated by Ziyue Chen, who's a beautiful illustrator and just does so many gorgeous things with light, which I think ties so well to the book. And it's just a very tender story that I'm excited to be sharing soon.
That is exciting. Do you find, because you've written adult, young adult, and now picture books, do you see yourself just moving into the picture book field, or are you going to, is this a back
Oh,
and forth where there's other YA and adult books kind of tinkering in your mind too? I'm just so curious.
yeah. Oh, there's plenty of everything. So all I need now is more time. But yeah, no, I do definitely, I mean, I'm still working on adult books and still working on YA. Um, and also the children's books. I don't really see any of it as like separate from one another. And I think because of the ways that they all came to be like so linked, just all part of my writing life and my writing process, I just see each one as like it gives me different opportunities to express different things from different parts of myself. Um, and to stay connected to all these different parts of me. I forget who it is that said like we're always all the ages we've ever been. So, I try to stay connected to my childhood self and my teenage self and myself from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and all that. So I just try to see like, yeah, where will I write from? And different stories will pull from different parts of me in that sense.
What a beautiful intention for a writing life like that. That's beautiful. I love the way that you think about that. And then it just makes it even more special as a reader too, and invites us maybe to do the same.
Oh,
Oh,
thank you.
I love that. What a wonderful philosophy.
Mhm.
Because at first glance, it does seem like they are different audiences and different genres and different aspects of writing. But as we've learned just in this conversation alone, you do have so many threads through all of them. And that must feel so good as a writer to bring different kinds of projects and different aspects out for that. And then all of your readers have so many different entry points that they can find you too.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so. It makes me happy to think of that, like if the reader might grow with the different stories. So,
Yeah. Oh, oh, what a beautiful way to end the
mhm.
conversation. I love it. Where can readers and listeners find you online
Oh,
to learn
yeah.
more about you and grab your books?
Yeah, well, my website is nataliasylvester.com, and I'm also on Instagram and in not as much. So I'm Natalia Sylv on Instagram and TikTok and Threads. Um, And I recently started a newsletter as a way to spend a little less time on social media because I still want to share things, but I'm trying to do it a little bit more intentionally,
Yeah.
and in a way that's providing me with more space to still keep working on my books without feeling like we have to be online all the time.
Yeah.
So but I can still be found there, and I'm always happy to connect with readers.
Wonderful. Well, I will put links to your website as well as the social media links online. I'll also include links to the books themselves in the show notes so that they can
Oh,
easily
cool.
just hop in and click on them and then figure out which one they want to read first and then trace all of the threads back that we've talked about to all the other books as well.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast today. And for everyone listening, thanks for listening. to another episode, and I'll see you next week with a new conversation with another author. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Kid Lit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of kid lit love. Thanks for listening.